Well, good morning and welcome to episode 9 of Logic and Reason. I am Logic, along with my co host, Reason. Jeff, why don't you say hi to everybody?
Well, hello everyone. Welcome to the show. Looking forward to this one. It's going to be a very, very interesting one. We're going to be talking about some really interesting stuff regarding flat Earth flight myths. Logical?
And unfortunately, one of our guests has been unable to join us so far. He may or may not join us later in the stream, but let me introduce our first guest, Blue Marble Science. Blue?
Yeah. Good morning, everybody. Had to find the unmute button. Took me a second. Good morning, everybody.
And as Jeff said, we're going to be discussing conspiracy theorist claims concerning airplanes in flight. They have been saying silly things like you would have to dip your nose to follow the curve of the Earth, or the Coriolis effect doesn't seem to affect airplanes, therefore Coriolis doesn't affect, is fake. So we thought we would tackle all of them all at once. But before we get started, I'd like to introduce our background crew, our chief mod, Amy Hogan.
Hello, everyone. I hope you're all doing well this morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are. Um, any questions or comments, please direct them to at Logic and Reason, please. Thank you. And thank you, Blue, for coming on today.
Oh, you're
And
more than welcome. Thank you.
and anybody in the live chat that has a mod wrench, please, if a conspiracy theorist shows up, let them go ahead and spot whatever they want to say, provided they're not being completely rude, making racist, homophobic remarks, that sort of thing. That stuff's got to go, but anything else is fine. We might even address some of their questions, comments, or concerns, provided they are on topic. And then covering all of our whistles, bells, and dials to keep our stream live and looking good, sounding good, Taddy Bogle. Good morning, Taddy.
Morning, troops. Morning, troops. I hope everyone's well this fine day. I just having a wee blast here in the back. Hopefully everything will behave itself, and it'll be a nice wee stream.
Thank you, Teddy. And I'll be the first to admit, when it comes to aviation, what I know can fill a small coffee cup. The bulk of my knowledge comes from actually riding in airplanes. I'm not a pilot, but that's why we set the format for this show that we did. We like to call in the experts that actually know what the hell they're talking about. So, Blue, I'm going to turn this over to you, let you have your say about what you think about the conspiracy theory claims, and go ahead, do your thing, man.
I haven't really prepared anything. So, what you'll hear coming from me is completely off the cuff. Sometimes that works out, and sometimes it doesn't. I am an old guy, but I think flight. I think you summed it up pretty well. I mean, most people. The limit of their experience is pretty much that they've ridden in airplanes. While there are quite a few people around that have credentials are capable of flying an airplane or have played with flight simulators or things like that, I think the vast majority of people are pretty much content just to know which gate they need to go to. And where the restroom is, and after that, it's all sort of a mystery.
And just so our audience knows, you are a licensed pilot and a certified flight instructor. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm not. I have not been an active flight instructor for quite a while now, and that is a rating that expires with time. If you don't continue doing it, they don't let you do it again until you go back and prove that you're still able to do it. So I just really hadn't been in the position in the last 15 years or so to involve myself in flight instruction. It's pretty time consuming, and you got to make a commitment to it. If you don't really like to see students swapping around between different flight instructors, it's not a good way to learn. But yes, I hold a single engine commercial rating, and that commercial rating primarily is required to do the flight instruction. Although I can perform any other duties of a commercial pilot as long as it's in a single engine aircraft. I've got an instrument rating, of course, which is a necessary thing, especially if you're going to teach instrument flight instruction. Let's see, I've got, you mentioned the flight instructor rating, but also an instrument flight instructor rating, which is another step in the process. And then only because I screwed up and took the wrong damn exam, I actually have a certified ground instructor, advanced ground instructor rating. I think myself and one other guy, anywhere on the planet, actually have that rating. It's basically worthless. But
I wouldn't say worthless.
I spent $70 taking the test, and actually, when I was taking my original flight instructor examination, which is a several-day process, the FAA examiner saw that certificate laying there on the table, and he said, "What is that?" And I explained it to him. He said, "Why in the world did you bother take? Why did you take that test?" And I said, I got confused which one I was taking. So I had to go back and take the other one. He said, "Well, just give me that one. I'm going to sign you off and get you a ground instructor rating, only because I don't know anybody that's got one, and I've never signed this off before either." So it's kind
A
of
special deal for both of you.
Yeah, but that's sort of my background. I've been involved in flying for a good part of my life. It was something I was always interested in as a kid. I actually thought about joining the Air Force, but some other things got in the way of that. But yeah, I started taking flight lessons in the late 60s, and I would start and stop and start and stop. And eventually I finally got to the point where I said, "Okay, I'm just going to have to stop this and put my head down and get and move through the entire program and actually get a pilot's license." And it was a journey, and it's a lot of fun though.
Is that something that you started off in civilian life, or was that part of when you were in the Army Reserve?
No, it's actually civilian life. Actually, civilian life. I looked into joining the Air Force to become a pilot, and then I found out the requirements to do that in terms of time commitment, and that was going to take another 3 years out of my life, and I just didn't want to give it up right then. I've looked back on it now and regret that decision many times, and I don't know if I could have done it anyway, really, but
Well, at
I
least
could
you
do
did
it. I could fly well enough to fly a Cessna, so okay.
What aircraft do you fly right now?
I have been pretty inactive here in recent years, but for a long time I owned a Mooney airplane called a Mooney. It's a 4-place single engine, pretty fast airplane. I had also access to a Piper Aztec, which is a twin-engine airplane. I've got a multi-engine rating too, only for private privileges, not commercial. And I don't know if I don't know if I can even count how many different makes and models of aircraft that I've flown over the years. It's been a lot of them. Probably pretty much everything Cessna makes, pretty much everything Piper makes, and a good number of the ones of the Beechcraft variety too.
And before we get too deep into the conversation, and it looks like Amy has some comments from the live chat that can start moving us toward the actual specific claims that conspiracy theories are making. Amy, what do you have for us?
Well, Pete Shea was in the chat, and he said if the Earth has never been proven scientifically to move, then it doesn't move. No Earth movement equals no ball because water. And then Andreas L. says airplanes do dip their nose 1 degree every 111 kilometers or 69 miles. So those are the two comments that we have so far.
Okay.
Well,
Well,
again, Blue, that's in your purview, so yeah, knock 'em dead.
it's always good to see Pete in the chat. You can usually count on Pete to make absolutely no damn sense whatsoever, and he hasn't let us down. Uh, that myth about airplanes dipping their nose is strictly a myth. Um, it results, I think, from just a fundamental misunderstanding of how an airplane works and what the forces are that act on an aircraft. And I'll try to do this without graphics. It's sometimes a little easier if you actually see it. But let me just talk for a second and see if it makes any sense. There are four forces acting on an aircraft: the weight of the plane, of course, the lift that the wing generates is the force that counteracts the weight, thrust that is being produced by the engine, which is counteracting drag, which is produced by the airplane moving through the air. Drag comes in a couple of varieties. A great portion of the drag is actually a result of the lift itself. Drag is the penalty you pay for lift. But in addition to that, you've just got friction with the skin of the plane, things that are hanging off the plane, like landing gear or pitot tubes or radio antennas or that sort of thing. Like sticking your hand out the window of the car, you know. Now, and this is something that confuses a lot of people. When we talk about straight and level flight, what we literally mean when we say that is that the plane is flying at a constant airspeed. It's neither accelerating nor is it decelerating. And and level means we are maintaining a constant altitude. Altitude above mean sea level, not above the ground, above mean sea level. So to be in straight and level flight, those forces all have to be balanced. Lift has to be equal to weight. Thrust has to be equal to drag. If thrust is greater than drag, then the plane is accelerating. If lift is greater than weight, then the plane is climbing. Now, have I got everybody confused at this point, or are we good?
No, I
Actually,
think
that
we're
makes
good.
perfect sense to me.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Perhaps you can explain a little bit about what is the drag coefficient. How does that play into it?
Well, let's think about it this way. In order to generate lift, the wing of the plane cannot simply fly straight through the air with its axis aimed in the same direction, its horizontal axis aimed in exactly the same direction as the direction of flight. The wing has to fly at what we call an angle of attack, and it has to be a positive angle of attack. In other words, the front of the wing has to be a little bit higher than the back of the wing. Very much like sticking your hand out the window of the car, holding your hand level, and then just rotating your hand up slightly so that the wind catches the palm of your hand. And every time you do that, you feel your hand be pushed up by the airflow, right? Everybody's done that.
Right. Yeah.
That's exactly what an airplane wing does. Exactly.
Gotcha.
Now, what you have to keep in mind, though, is the fact that that pressure is a result of two things. It's a result of, number one, the velocity with which the wing is moving through the air. But secondly, it's a result of the density of the air. The less dense the air, the less pressure.
Hmm.
So,
Meaning it's more difficult to maintain lift the higher up you go.
right, exactly. So let's go back to our straight and level flight concept for a second. If we want to fly the airplane at, let's just pick a number, 5,000 feet above mean sea level, we will climb to 5,000 feet by creating a situation where we are producing more lift than the weight of the plane. And in a small plane, that climb rate may be 500 feet per minute. So 10 minutes later, taking off from sea level, we reach 5,000 feet. Okay, now what? Well, we don't need that much lift anymore. We'll change things a little bit. We'll increase our airspeed, but we'll do that by dropping the nose down. And what we'll find is an equilibrium point where we have, we call it trimming the plane. There's a little trim tab on the tail of the plane, or a method of trimming the tail of the plane, so that we are maintaining exactly the right angle of attack to give us a balance between lift and weight. Okay. And once we do that, the plane flies hands off. You can literally take your hands off the control yoke, and the plane will simply maintain that altitude. Because keep one thing in mind, an airplane has no idea where it is in space. It doesn't know where the ground is. It doesn't care where the ground is. It doesn't know how high it is. It doesn't care. All it wants to do is balance those forces. If you leave it alone, it will try to come into an equilibrium condition. So once we reach 5,000 feet altitude that we were trying to get to, and we level off at 5,000 feet so that we're not climbing or not descending, and our airspeed is constant, it's not accelerating or decelerating, the airplane is now trimmed, and it will stay at 5,000 feet forever, or it will stay at that density, at an altitude where the air is the density that it was when we trimmed the plane. The only thing that really changes is, let's say we fly into a low pressure weather system or something like that, which can happen on longer flights. You may have to make some adjustments to correct the altitude if you do that. As you fly along, you're burning fuel, of course. Everything else is remaining the same, but you are burning fuel, so the plane's becoming lighter. So that will have an effect over time. But in general, there is no correction being made, nor would there be a correction necessary to maintain altitude within reason. Now, that's not going to necessarily get us within the precision level that the Federal Aviation Administration would like us to be within. They really want us to stay within about 100 feet of our altitude. So, pilots will constantly be making very slight adjustments, sometimes pushing the nose down, sometimes pulling the nose up, whatever's required to stay right on the assigned altitude that we're at. And in more sophisticated aircraft, the autopilot itself is doing that on a second-by-second basis. But that whole idea that for some reason or the other we need to push the nose over because the Earth is curving is just bullshit. And it's bullshit because the air density is the same at 5,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean as it is at 5,000 feet above the Pacific Ocean. Same thing. So the airplane naturally is going to follow the curve.
Yeah, I think part of the problem with the conspiracy theorists is they have this mistaken notion that gravity doesn't exist. Therefore, if Earth were a sphere and the plane just kept flying straight, it would eventually fly off into space. Of course, that's also a misunderstanding of the sense of scale, how much larger the planet is compared to the airplane. But of course, gravity does exist. And that's just one of those things that's one of those forces that's operating on the airplane itself. But as I understand what you're saying, the only thing that's really being adjusted for isn't the curve of the Earth, but the loss of mass due to the fuel burning.
Yeah, that's that or some change in the atmospheric conditions, or someone, one of your passengers, for instance, decides to relocate to the rear of the plane or the front of the plane, which changes the balance of the aircraft, and that changes the trim, things like that.
Yeah.
But nothing to do with the Earth, with the curvature of the Earth.
Yeah.
And think about everything I just talked about. As the plane tries to climb, we know what happens to our atmosphere in terms of the atmospheric pressure with respect to altitude, right? I mean, everybody knows, even the flat Earth people admit that there's a pressure gradient. So that by itself tells you this is not going to work. The airplane is not going to go flying off into space. As soon as it starts climbing, it is climbing into air that's less dense. It cannot continue doing that.
Yeah.
It
And
will lose
also,
lift when it does, and descend again.
not to mention the fact that the higher it goes, the less oxygen-rich air there is for the engines to burn its fuel.
Yeah, you've got an impact on the thrust as well. That is true.
And how about the conditions that everybody's familiar with who's traveled anything? Turbulence, that has an effect as well. But that's the trim tabs that deal with that, isn't it not?
Well, turbulence is just a fact of life. Yeah, it's going to occur to some degree, probably on every flight. And generally speaking, the best thing as a pilot, the best thing you can do normally in turbulence is leave it alone. Don't try to correct for it. Let the plane do that itself, and it will in most cases. There are times when you just can't resist, trying to straighten things out, but sometimes you can actually make it worse. We call it pilot-induced turbulence.
Of course, I just had a nightmare scenario go off in my head when you were talking about air density, that I can just see a conspiracy theorist watching this stream and say, see, I told you it was all about density and buoyancy, so we may as well squash that right now. If density and buoyancy were the only things operating and gravity didn't exist, once the airplane got up there in the lower, less dense atmosphere, it wouldn't need fuel to stay up there.
No, no, it wouldn't. Yeah, let's get that thought out of our heads right away. I'm sorry. As much as as much as it may break your heart, gravity is real.
Yeah, I've just dealt with conspiracy theorists long enough now that I can already anticipate some of the arguments. But let's turn over to Amy and see if there's anything going on in the live chat that she'd like us to know about.
Oh, definitely. Yes. I've got some good comments here. One was from, a bunch from Kristen Scott, Frost Laser Beams. She said, good explanation. She understands it better now, and that's good. And then she said, airplanes are not point and go things. It takes adjustment constantly. Winds, turbulence. Would you even notice dipping the nose even a tiny bit? And then she says, why do flurfs refuse to listen to real pilots? I don't get it. And then Marky Mark says, why do flurfs ignore the fact that reality doesn't match the model? I don't get that either.
And after Pete left, Amy, did I see there was another potential conspiracy theorist pop in after he left?
Yes, we have someone named Witza in the chat that is leaning that way.
Okay, well, keep your eyes peeled for him, and if he asks a relevant question, be sure to let me know.
I will.
Anyway, you were going to say there, Blue?
Forgot what I was going to say. So it'll come to me in a second.
Yeah, I would like to kind of go back a little bit to the statement you made earlier about the aircraft and the simple design of the aircraft, its natural tendency to just want to stay balanced and fly. I kind of got this, I remember this event from several years back where a Japanese 747 lost its horizontal stabilizer or its vertical stabilizer. And it got into this, I think they call it the fugal effect, where it kept going up and down and up and down.
Yeah, fugal-weight oscillation. Yeah. It's called a fugal-weight oscillation. Yeah, that had a tragic ending to it, unfortunately.
But it goes to show that the airplane did want to stay in the air.
Yeah, yeah. That has happened on many airplanes with real serious problems with the control surfaces. The I think it was an American flight that crashed in Wichita. What was that thing? L1011, I think, or DC. Yeah, L10, I think.
Yeah, I think it was
Lost
an
all of
L10.
its hydraulics when the center engine exploded. They had that issue with the oscillation up and down, but they were able to control it. Actually, made under the circumstances, a reasonable landing, if you can call what they did a landing. And a lot of people survived. A lot of them didn't, but we're still able to get out of it. That flight in Japan, I think, still remains the single most deadly aircraft incident of all times, involving just a single aircraft. More people died in that mess in the Canary Islands many years ago between two 747s when they collided on the ground. But yeah, that was a horrible deal. But it just shows you how stable airplanes are. That 747 over Japan lost the entire horizontal tail, the horizontal stabilizer, elevators, everything, and it still maintained. It was still able to stay in the air for almost a half hour, I think. It's incredible.
It is.
Now, you can intentionally make airplanes unstable, and they do. And aerobatic aircraft, for instance, if you want to go up and do lots of really cool aerobatic tricks, you don't really want an airplane that's stable. You want one that will stay where you put it. And the military fighters, although I would have no experience with those things, obviously, but I can just imagine how unstable one of them would be for the same reason. You don't want it trying to correct itself. You want it to stay where you put it. But most airplanes have very, very good stability.
Yeah. I would equate it to lift being the string that's got it tied to the ground, or gravity, and lift is like the centrifugal force. And it's like spinning a ball around.
Yeah.
It doesn't need to be dipped or pointed in any particular direction. It's going to maintain its distance from you for as long as you're spinning it.
Yeah, it has to, unless you change something.
That's basically what's happening with an airplane, I would think.
Yeah, if you're gonna, I mean, it just has to do what it does. It makes perfect sense. What I would, and I remember now what I was going to say. What I would highly encourage people that think old Blue here doesn't know what he's talking about. There's bound to be a small airport nearby. Almost everybody can find one within 50 miles. And most, even small airports, will have a flight school of some sort. Do this. Go ask for an introductory flight. Go with a flight instructor in a real airplane, one that you can put your own hands on the controls and fly yourself, and they'll let you do that. They'll take you up, and you can be the pilot for a half hour, and you can see exactly how this works. In fact, tell the flight instructor what your concerns are and let him demonstrate for you how the plane maintains its altitude without you touching it. That's my suggestion.
Good suggestion.
That's interesting. I did not know that you could do that.
Yeah. Yeah,
Be
absolutely.
fair, I have actually done that.
So have I when I was a young guy.
I did that back in the 90s at Glasgow School of Flying. And yeah, what an experience. So definitely, if you've got an airport near you, get out and get a shot.
Yeah, most flight schools will give you a free introductory flight.
It would answer a lot of questions for these people who don't seem to want to learn it.
Yeah, instead of sitting behind the keyboard here, staring at a video screen, go get in a real airplane and try it.
Yeah. Exactly right.
Now, what the FLIRF will say is, well, I just proved that the Earth is flat. I didn't have to dip the nose because the Earth's not curved.
Yeah, you know that's coming, huh?
Of course.
Yeah.
Geodesic file.
Yeah, but the difference in 3,000 miles and, of the Earth versus the, the what, 40, 50 feet of a length of a small plane. I mean, that's a humongous difference. So no matter where you're going to be, I just can't wrap my head around how they can't understand that aspect of scale.
That's, I think, their biggest shortcoming. They just don't understand scale.
I think that's an absolute fact. They have no feel for it.
No. I mean, when you think
can't.
about the scale, when you think about the scale of an aircraft, even at 40,000 feet and the Earth below it, it seems like it's flying over a flat and level plane because the simple size of the Earth beneath it. But it's not.
Yeah, the Earth is such a gigantic thing compared to us little small Earthlings in our airplanes. I mean, the Earth is just gigantic.
Mm-hmm.
We've recently, this comes up all the time, but had a discussion going on about phases of the moon and things like that. And to try to help one particular individual understand this a little bit better, I did a drawing, an actual 2-scale drawing on AutoCAD. To show him the relationship between and the relative sizes of the sun, the earth, and the moon, and the actual scale distances those things are apart. And when you see it done to scale, it's a wow moment when you realize how big even the small part of the solar system we live in is.
Mm-hmm.
It's phenomenal.
Certainly is eye-opening.
Yeah, well, that old I can't see the curve and I don't feel it move argument is perfectly logical in one way and makes absolutely no sense in another way. You shouldn't be able to see the curve and you shouldn't feel it move. What's the problem?
Exactly right. I mean, how can you possibly expect to see it when you're standing on the ground of something that's so incredibly larger than you are?
You can't.
You can't. There is no way. That doesn't mean it isn't there. And there are phenomena that we can see that prove that curve is there. But they don't want to see that. They don't want to admit to that.
Yeah, you see pictures from high altitude balloons. A guy named Dwayne Kellum does some wonderful, even though he's a flat earther, he makes some wonderful balloon pictures and he instruments his balloons correctly with altimeters and actual pressure indications and stuff like that. And really nice cameras with rectilinear lenses. And the curvature is quite obvious. I mean, it's not like you got to guess at it. It's obviously curved.
Yeah, absolutely. There is something else that I hear a lot of these conspiracy theorists claim, just kind of move the conversation along, and that has to do with plotting and planning your flights. Their straight line flight plan versus the Great Circle route. Is flight planning as we know it even possible on the flat Earth? I doubt it.
I don't think it would make any sense at all. I don't know how you would do it. I really don't. Um, none of the techniques or charts or anything that we use would work. Everything is based on a spherical Earth. Period.
Mm-hmm.
Every flight
Yeah,
chart we use is based on it.
That's one of the things I've seen the conspiracy theories harping on in the last few months was that flight. I think it was from Japan to San Francisco where they made a detour to Alaska for the lady giving birth, as somehow being evidence of a flat earth. But what they're not understanding was that was the Great Circle route, which, according to non-Euclidean geometry, was the closest place for them to land in order to get the woman the emergency medical services that she needed.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're going to go down. You're going to put it down at the closest available runway. And if you just take a flat map and draw a straight line across it, it might look like Hawaii is the correct choice. When in fact, the actual straight line over a curved surface is taking you very close to Alaska and down the west coast of the U.S. It's not going over Hawaii. It doesn't work that way.
Well, that flight takes a polar route, doesn't it?
Actually, it's not a polar route. It's no, it's just you pull it up on. I'm thinking they left from Taiwan, maybe somewhere like that. But pull it up on Google Earth sometime and just draw a line from say Taiwan to San Francisco or Los Angeles and see which way that thing goes. It doesn't go anywhere near Hawaii.
Actually, Teddy, if you got a spare moment while you're taking care of the stream, if you could look that up and throw that up on the screen so Blue can speak about it, that would be wonderful. And while he's doing that, Amy has poked me in the ribs in the background to let me know she has some interesting comments and questions from the live chat.
Great.
I do, please. Yes, I have some really good ones. Andreas Eld says he asked, airplanes usually fly with the nose slightly pointing up. Wouldn't the drag of the fuselage be smaller if it were pointing straight on, or does it contribute to lift? And then Kristen Frost Laserbeam says, also look at the GPS thing, shows a curved surface on the monitor. The pilot I flew with in Iceland let me sit up front and let me drive for a few until we hit some major mountain caused turbulence. And then Mike Bertelson says, but how many adjustments did that Flurf have to make to keep the plane straight, level, on course, and at altitude? Just saying.
Good point.
Yeah. The way the plane, planes always fly with the nose slightly up. That's to achieve a positive angle of attack. That's to get the lift that we need. So yeah, it typically will be a couple of degrees. Maybe it's not enough that the passengers really notice it.
Yeah, and Blue, Teddy just poked me in the background saying that he was preoccupied with running the stream and wanted you to reiterate what it was he was looking for to screen share for the flight path that you were talking about.
Yeah, let's just take a look at if you could pull up Google Earth and just draw a line from, let's say, Taiwan to Los Angeles or in the vicinity.
So give me 2 seconds and we'll see what we can do.
Yeah. It shows you pretty quickly what's wrong with that idea that they should have landed the plane in Hawaii for some reason.
Another thing that flat earthers have never been able to convince me of, and no matter what stupid reasons they give, the flight from Santiago to Sydney would be impossible on a flat earth.
There is no airplane on the planet that has enough fuel to do that.
Exactly right. And yet Qantas Airline does it twice a week.
Yeah.
You can book a flight this morning.
Oh, yeah. Well, they love to make a big deal out of that. And it is not a lot of flights that go along that route. But you got to remember that airlines don't fly just for the fun of it. That's a for-profit business. They do what makes sense and it makes money for them. If you've got enough people to fill 2 airplanes a week, you're certainly not going to fly the plane every day just in case somebody else shows up. Heck no. Any other time, You just do what you need to do. You route them through other places. That's just part of business. That's all. It has nothing to do with the shape of the earth. It has to do with the shape of the bank account.
And as we all know, even if they did make daily circumpolar flights around the globe, a flat earther would find some way to deny it anyway.
Yeah.
Well, there are lots of flights that go close to the North Pole, circumpolar flights from North America into Japan or someplace in the Pacific like that. There are no flights that do that in the Southern Hemisphere, and they talk about that all the time. But again, look at the choices of where where there are major airports that you could leave from and go to. And yes, you can leave from the tip of South America and head directly over the South Pole and continue and end up in the middle of nowhere in the Pacific Ocean. There is no destination to go to. That's the problem. And if you have to go far enough to get to a destination, it's beyond the range of any airplane. There's another thing too. You can't just simply take a twin engine aircraft and go flying like that over the pole. The planes that do that are 4-engine planes.
Long distance flight.
Yep.
And Teddy just let me know in the background that Google Earth is arguing with him for some reason and not loading properly. But he'll keep trying to beat it into submission as we speak. So if any conspiracy theorist is in the chat, we will get that up and we will talk about that eventually in this stream. Hey, internet does weird things sometimes, and it has nothing to do with us hiding anything from you.
It's NASA.
The strangest thing happens if I turn on Google Earth on my machine, and I've got a decent computer here. This thing's pretty fast, but for some reason, when I turn Google Earth on, the stream will start roboting. I have never been able to figure that out.
Now, Google Earth is, pretty data dense, compared to other websites that you could be visiting during a live stream.
Yeah. It's a phenomenal program. I love it that the flat earthers will argue with you while they're pointing at the Google Earth that they pulled up. Do they understand that that's actually a globe?
I doubt it.
Wouldn't seem like it.
And Amy, I just kind of took a peek in the live chat for a moment, and I saw that Witza was arguing with Mike Bertelson about something, but I wasn't able to concentrate enough to get the gist of it. Can you bring that to our attention?
Yes. So talking about the sun he claims that the sun is in the vicinity. I mean, inside our atmosphere, and Mike Bertelson was trying to explain to him about energy output and distance, and also Witz is saying that luminary zoom magnifications cannot happen from trillion-mile distances, and things like that. So that's what's going on right now.
Well, that's actually an interesting conversation right there, but not relevant to the conspiracy comments and claims about airplanes and all the forces that work with them. But yeah, Jeff, definitely jot that down in your notebook for me so that we can actually plan an episode to address that specifically.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, I'm sorry that Bob, the science guy, didn't make it this morning because that almost touches. Well, that touches on the first video I ever made, and Bob was a part of it, where we did the Eratosthenes experiment. And all you need are two observers like Bob and myself, 500 miles apart, like we are, and you can quickly prove to yourself that the sun is nowhere near the Earth. It cannot be. unless it can figure out a way to be at two different altitudes at the same time.
That would be a neat trick.
Yeah.
That would be a very neat trick.
Yep.
Yeah.
Strange that everybody along the same latitude will get the same elevation, the same altitude. As soon as you separate the distances in latitude, everything goes all to hell. The flat model no longer works.
And let's see. In the background before we got started, before you joined the voice part of the chat, Blue, Jeff had asked a question about spatial reasoning. Jeff, how did you word that?
Yeah, I was reading up on standard pilot competencies for professional or commercial pilots, and I read a little something about one of the core competencies being spatial awareness and spatial thinking. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Well, situational awareness probably is more the way I think about it, and it just simply means exactly what it says, being completely aware of where you are and what is going on around you. Not losing track. You've got to, in other words, you simply need to pay attention. There's a well, because as much as all of us would like to think we can trust our senses, the fact of the matter is your senses will kill you in an airplane. There is a thing called spatial disorientation. It all has to do with the way your inner ear works. But because of the way forces are applied to you in an aircraft, if you cannot see visually the outside reference, the horizon, within 90 seconds, you will have no idea whether that airplane is upside down, right side up, or what. It's frightening the first time you get that demonstrated to you. You have to be, and that's why we have special training for instrument flight. Flight by reference to instruments means exactly that you can no longer see the horizon. You can't see outside the plane. And somehow or the other, you've got to maintain that thing in a straight level attitude. This may normally occur when you're in the clouds. And we all know that when you're in the clouds, usually it's a little bit bumpy, right?
Yeah.
You've got to train yourself to ignore what your body is telling you. This is precisely what killed JFK Jr. He was not an instrument-rated pilot. He got himself into what would, by any definition, be instrument flight conditions, and he just chose to try to pay attention to what his body was telling him, rather than knowing how to read and interpret the instruments properly. And it is tragically the result, the cause of a lot of accidents, incidents, and deaths every year.
And it looks like Amy finally got a relevant comment from our conspiracy theorist that's in the live chat. Amy, what did he say?
Yes, he said undetectable nose drop means it isn't there, doctor. Next point.
Oh, am I incorrect in reading that as he's conceding that point?
Could be.
So, that's progress, I suppose, of a sort.
I suppose, yeah.
Well, we've also have heard conspiracy theorists claiming that Coriolis isn't real because it doesn't seem to affect airplanes. Blue, what do you got to say about that particular one?
Well, it actually does affect airplanes, but in such a slight manner, you would never be able to detect that. I did a video on that actually, and calculated the Coriolis effect on an aircraft, and I believe if if I remember my numbers correctly, in a small airplane like a Mooney, like the one like the plane I used to own, in a small airplane like that, in order to counteract the effect of Coriolis, I would have to bank the wing roughly 0.04 of 1 degree. That's all. It's only about a 2-pound force on the side of the plane, a 2-pound force on the side of a 2,500-pound airplane. That's nearly nothing. So while there would be a correction being made, I would never be able to tell you I was making that correction. I would have no idea. But I think a lot of this has to do with the fact that people don't really understand how you navigate in an airplane. We don't typically just set out from, let's say, East Tennessee, where I live, to Dallas, Texas, and aim the plane where we think Dallas, Texas is and hope we get there. That's not how it works. In the old days, there were methods. One of the fundamental methods is called just simply pilotage, which basically means look out the damn window and see where you are, right? And then pick up a heading that takes you to someplace else that you can recognize, and keep doing that. As long as you can look out and see where and recognize where you are, you're not lost. Now things get a little more sophisticated as time goes on, and we develop radio navigation methods. Those are specific radio beacons that are in known spots with specific frequencies and devices in the aircraft that will tell us exactly how to fly to that navigation aid. So we don't go from East Tennessee to Dallas, Texas. We go from East Tennessee to someplace in Middle Tennessee, to someplace in West Tennessee, to someplace in Arkansas, to some on and on and on, a series of waypoints, and you fly point to point to point. Now, GPS makes this a lot easier because then you don't really have to worry about the waypoints. You just follow the GPS path, but that's a great circle route. As long as you stay in the center of that, you're going to end up where you want to go.
Yeah, and Teddy just poked me in the background, letting me know that he wants to put something in the corner of our screen. Teddy, throw that up there and then tell everybody what it is and why you're putting it there.
Yep, no worries. Basically, what I'm putting up is a share of the Google Earth window, just so you can see my progress with getting it loaded. You'll see Google Earth itself, and then there's a light grey bar underneath the words Google Earth. That's the progress bar. At this point, it's not moved.
Okay, very good, Teddy. Since we do have a conspiracy theorist in the live chat, that's good for him to know that you're not just pulling his leg, that technology is just being a little slow for you. But when possible, we will get that up and we will address that particular point. And it looks like, let me double check here. I am thinking that he's going to get stepped on quite hard in the live chat, because Amy just said that Witza has let us know that nose drop undetectable, gravity undetectable, therefore the scientific method must dismiss. Well, Witza, not so much. And in fact, if you show up on January 5, we are going to be doing a show on the scientific method, and we will have Blue Marble Science here, along with AB Science, who is a physicist, to discuss the scientific method.
Don't totally understand the comment, though, that says gravity is undetectable. How can you think that gravity is undetectable? When let's talk about for one split, just 1 second. What gravity are we talking about? You're talking about the gravitational attraction of the Earth, which we see as an acceleration. We see a 9.8 meter per second acceleration, regardless of what size the object is or how massive the object is. And if we do it in a vacuum where we eliminate wind resistance, everything falls toward the center of the Earth at 9.8 meters per second. Now, are you telling me that you can't observe that acceleration, because it, that's just nonsense. Of course you can observe it.
And I guess at this point, since we're talking about gravity, we may as well talk a little bit about how gravity affects flight in general.
Well, gravity, that acceleration, and thanks to Sir Isaac for this one. He was able to explain to us that force, and that's what we know is weight. It's actually a force, is the mass of the airplane times the acceleration the airplane is experiencing. Well, the main acceleration acting on the airplane in level flight, the only acceleration acting on it is the acceleration of gravity. It is being accelerated toward the Earth at 9.8 meters per second, and we're providing a counteracting acceleration with the lift of the plane so that we can stay at the altitude we want to stay at. It's that simple.
Yeah. And gravity is the reason it just doesn't fly in a straight line and off into space, because you would need at sea level, if I'm remembering my numbers correctly, 7 meters a second in velocity to escape the gravitational field.
I don't remember the number off the top of my head, but yeah, it would be a lot.
Which are why rockets that go into orbit carry so much fuel and move so friggin' fast. But I don't want to let Witza pull us off topic completely. Conspiracy theorists are good for that. So I'll simply state that, keep watching this channel, Witza. We enjoy your comments. And whenever your comments are relevant to the conversation we're currently having, we'll certainly be addressing them. And every point you've raised, we've either previously discussed in a previous episode or will be discussing in a future episode. So, let's see. What other kind of conspiracy claims that do they make about flight in general? Jeff or Blue or Amy, poke my memory here. It's still early in the morning for me.
Yeah, it's pretty late at night for me, actually. But yeah, spatial thinking is an important part of being a pilot. Understanding where you are in relation to the globe that you're flying above, and what's around you. But I think there's also a component where you have to be able to think that way to be able to plot your flight, to maximize your fuel efficiency, as well as being able to reach your destination without being too far away from emergency services should you need them.
Yeah, flight planning has a lot to do with making sure that you stay within reach, if you can, of a suitable emergency landing site.
Yeah,
And
which is probably
it's a pretty important thing. If you have a problem, you want to be able to get down.
Yeah, and that's why there aren't that many flights over the South Pole, because there's nowhere to go if you hit an emergency.
Yeah, that's a real issue. I mean, that's a real serious issue. I've taken my airplane across the Great Lakes before, and if you're out in the middle of Lake Michigan, you're quite a long way from, right in the center of it. You're quite a long way from any shoreline.
Absolutely.
So you have to stop. You have to start thinking. How much altitude do I really need? What is the glide ratio of this airplane? If I'm at 10,000 feet, will I have enough altitude if I lose the engine? Will I have enough altitude to make it to the other side, or to turn around and go back where I came from? I mean, those are considerations that really go through every pilot's mind. You think about that, and you're constantly, when you're flying, thinking about where what's your out. If something happens, where will I go?
And And if I remember correctly, Blue, and please do correct me if I'm incorrect, a glide ratio for something like a small Cessna would be 1-to-1, which basically, in my understanding, means if you lose your engine, it'll move 1 meter forward and drop 1 meter in altitude at the same time.
Well, let me correct that slightly. The glide ratio on a small plane like that is really more like 10-to-1. For every meter you drop, you'll go forward about 10 meters.
Oh, okay.
So that makes it sound better. You immediately feel better now, don't you? I know.
A little bit, yeah, because I know how big the Great Lakes are. They're not as small as people seem to think they are when they just look at it on an overview map.
Yeah.
No, not at all. So if I'm at 10,000 feet, if I have 10,000 feet between me and the ground below me, I should be able to make about 100,000 feet of distance, or 20 miles.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
I think
check how wide Lake Michigan is. You're not going to make it. The engine dies in the center of it. You won't make it.
Yeah, not to mention the fact that you're losing forward speed, and also you're losing the power to stay up. Well, the drag is constantly slowing you down faster and faster.
Well, what we do, and this is another thing that people don't particularly understand about flight, they sort of get it backwards, and it was a demonstration that I used to love to do with students, is to take them up, trim the plane, have the thing flying in stable level flight, like we talked about. We're not accelerating or decelerating. We're not climbing. We're not descending. The plane is trimmed to fly like that. And I would ask a student, what do you think is going to happen if I pull the engine power? I'm not going to turn it off, but what happens if I pull the engine power back to idle, for instance? What do you think will happen? And almost invariably, a student will say, well, the plane will slow down. Nope. The plane won't slow down. The plane will start losing altitude, but the airspeed won't change. The airspeed will stay.
Drop.
It will actually.
Right, yeah. You still have the conservation of momentum then, right?
Yeah. Actually, the airspeed will probably increase slightly because you're losing some. When you lose if it's a prop plane, when you lose the pressure, the pressure on the top of the horizontal stabilizer, which is partly resulting from the air coming off the propeller, corkscrewing around the plane. Okay, and it will strike the top surface of the horizontal tail. You lose a little bit of that down pressure, and the nose drops. And when the nose drops, it picks up a little bit of speed. But pitch is what controls airspeed. Pitch and pitch alone. That's what controls airspeed. Power controls altitude.
Gotcha.
So every airplane has got a best glide speed. You know exactly what that is. That's something you need to know about your airplane. Every pilot knows what his best glide speed is. And in the case of an emergency, the thing you want to do is immediately trim the plane for that airspeed, and then just accept however much descent rate that gives you.
Gotcha.
And it's been a little bit yet since we've checked in with Amy. Amy, I'm pretty sure at this point you've got some interesting comments and questions from the live chat, yeah?
Yeah, Witz is talking about things being trillions of miles away, and they were talking too about how huge the Great Lakes are, and they actually are. They're pretty big. Yeah, take all the water in the Great Lakes and spread it over the USA, and it would be 6 feet deep. That's what Joseph Grant says about the Great Lakes.
That's a lot of water.
Yeah.
That is a lot.
The only thing I can think of with what's talking about the trillions of miles away would be stellar parallax, and again, an upcoming episode.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah, they don't like to keep it simple. We can't just simply talk about the acceleration of gravity and confine it to the gravitational well of the Earth. We've got to immediately go to Einstein's theories and start talking about black holes and all of that nonsense. Jesus, guys, let's try to keep it simple.
Yeah, let's lay the groundwork of the basics before we, lay grade school before we move to
Yeah.
post-secondary degree work.
Yeah, baby steps.
There's a lot of silly ideas out there about flight, and unfortunately, the flat earthers, they seem to love pointing them out. For example, one of them that always makes me laugh is the one made by Daniel Pratt, where he actually thinks that a helicopter can lift up and hover and let the Earth spin beneath it. I mean, come on.
Yeah,
Let's get real here, folks.
They try to use that as proof of Coriolis not existing. And refuse to recognize the simple fact that the atmosphere spins with the Earth in lockstep, in exact sync with the Earth. Now,
Absolutely.
that does not mean that there are not within the atmosphere air currents, jet streams, weather systems, all sorts of things that are not moving exactly the way the Earth is moving. But the atmosphere itself is moving exactly in lockstep with the Earth, period. And there's nothing to stop it from happening.
Absolutely
Think about that. I mean, that's that vast vacuum of space that they love to talk about offers absolutely no resistance whatsoever to the atmosphere. There's nothing up there to slow it down. What would ever make it slow down? You've got friction down here at the surface that would drag it along, but there's nothing opposing that.
Exactly. And why is that such a hard thing to understand? That's my question.
I don't know. It seems like such a simple concept.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Woodson just said in the live chat that it's sad how we as grown adults can be adopting Disney fabrications as real. So, Woodson, if you can explain that, how anything so far in this conversation about how airplanes work, and stay on that topic, explain to me how anything we've been discussing about how airplanes work is a Disney fabrication.
It's all just basic avionics and physics, really. That anybody with a little bit of a desire to learn can understand and can pick up. I mean, if you want to talk about aircraft that are constantly putting their nose down, the only one I can ever think of that I've been on is a helicopter. And the only reason why its nose is pointing down is in relation to the rotating blades above it.
Yeah, that's how you gain forward speed in a helicopter.
Exactly. That's the only aircraft I've ever seen or heard of that actually points its nose down the majority of the time that it's in flight.
Yep. No other airplane would do that. But the helicopter example is particularly silly. And it's particularly silly for the simple reason. There is no Coriolis effect for something that's stationary, whether it's in an inertial reference frame or a non-inertial reference frame. It doesn't make any difference. If it's not moving in that inertial or non-inertial frame, there can be no Coriolis. With the atmosphere locked to the Earth and the helicopter hovering above the Earth, it is not moving in the non-inertial rotating frame of reference. Therefore, no Coriolis.
Bingo. It's locked in with everything else. Exactly right.
Yeah, Coriolis only takes effect once it starts moving forward. Because now it's in a moving frame of reference.
Yeah, well, think about the two kids on the merry-go-round. One kid holding the ball, and the other kid waiting for the ball to be thrown. Is the ball experiencing Coriolis when it's being held by the kid on the one side of the merry-go-round? Hell no, it's not. It's not moving. No. As soon as you let it move in that non-inertial frame, then the curve starts. Then the effect begins. And not until.
Yeah. A very simple experiment that anybody can do on any playground anywhere in the world.
Yep.
And Amy, I've noticed you've been poking me in the ribs in the background. What do you got for us?
Yes, I have some really interesting comments here. I had some from Witsa. He says trillions and trillions and trillions of miles away is everything that influences human consciousness. Cartoons. We surely live in a zombie circus. And then he asks the 4,500 miles of ocean between New York and London decides that there is a 700-mile mound of water between the two cities. If this ocean froze momentarily, then would you be able to ice skate across it? And then Mike Bertelson has a really good comment. He says it's called a planetary boundary layer and is exactly the same as the standard boundary layer in fluid dynamics, something you can test with a hose, some sand, and a tub of water.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, the atmosphere does react in fluid dynamics the same way water does, which is why scientists will test things about the atmosphere in really big tanks of water.
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, water's a fluid, air is a fluid. They're both fluids. They have some
Yes, they are.
significant differences, obviously. Water being mostly incompressible and air being quite happy to be compressed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
And
the
I think
behavior
that's
still-
of them are very similar.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's a simple experiment you can do to prove that to yourself, and that is just get yourself some baking soda and some vinegar in a big fruit jar. Okay, let the two react, and then pour the CO2 into a paper bag that's balanced with another paper bag on a yardstick, and you'll see the one you're pouring the CO2 into drop.
Yep.
It's pouring just like water. You just can't see it because it's still a gas. But CO2 is heavier than the air around it, so that side of the scale will drop.
Yep.
Simple experiment. Any child can do it. Matter of fact, I've had my grade 3 students do it themselves.
And kids, if you're listening, that is not density that's causing that. That is the acceleration of gravity causing that.
Exactly.
Things don't fall down because of their density. That's just that's a reification fallacy.
Yeah,
Exactly.
and I think that last comment from Witza was probably in response to my question to him, about the Disney crack, but of course that's not on topic, which is a very typical conspiracy theorist tactic, try to redirect and misdirect and not stay on topic. So, yeah, if he can't stay on topic, I'm not overly concerned with anything he's got to say at the moment.
Yeah.
Well, just keep in mind, you only need two fairly simple expressions. One being something that Sir Isaac told us about force being equal to mass times acceleration, and another handy formula that defines what we call the ideal gas law. You can simply combine those two formulas, and knowing nothing more than that, you can derive an expression that will exactly predict what goes on in the atmosphere in terms of our pressure gradient. It's called the barometric formula. It barely requires one simple first order differential equation. It's not that hard to do. In fact, I did a video on it. And if I can do it, anybody can do it.
I'm pretty sure everybody in the live chat is familiar with your channel, Blue, but if they're not, I'm going to ask Amy or Taddy to put the link to your channel in the live chat, and I'll encourage everybody after this show to go check him out. He's got some really good stuff.
Very good stuff. I would highly recommend that you take a look at his video where he demonstrated a gas pressure next to in a container without or non-closed container. Sorry, I'm jumbling over my words. That was a great experiment, and it goes to prove beyond the shadow of a doubt that gas is possible next to a vacuum without losing the gas, thanks to gravity.
Yeah. That's what it shows.
Yeah.
Now that one, that simple experiment has driven the flat earthers crazy.
Oh, it has.
They have been hammering me for months and months and months now about the open pipe being a container, and it's really a game of semantics they like to play. So if they want to play, I'll play. All I want them to do, any flat earther listening, here's the deal. All you've got to do is give me one credible citation that says you can pressurize a gas in a pipe with one end of it open. Show me where any place that says that, and I'll take my video down. That is not. Yeah, good luck finding that.
Yeah, it's
Because it can't be
interesting.
done. The problem
It's
is that they like to conflate gas pressure with atmospheric pressure. They like to confuse those. That's a false equivalence.
Yeah, they're two totally separate things. And it's interesting how when you ran that experiment, all of a sudden the definition of container had changed.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, up to that point, it was the classic, Boyle's law sort of concept, where the container obviously has to be sealed if you're going to pressurize it. And you can modify the pressure in it by changing its volume or changing the temperature of the gas, all those things that are contained in the ideal gas law. But you can't do it if the damn pipe doesn't have a cap on the end of it.
Exactly. And once you put that cap on it and pressurize it even a little bit, you're going to lose the gradient.
Yeah.
So explain that.
Yeah, and a little, I guess, piece of trivia that talks about aviation and the atmospheric pressure gradient. Jeff and I were talking about, I think before you joined the conversation, Blue, before we started the stream, is I was watching a documentary about Neil Armstrong several days ago. And they were talking about how when he was a test pilot before he joined the space program, he was flying the X-1 back in the late 50s, early 60s. And he had gotten high enough that he was become part of the outer layer of the atmosphere and had to wait until the friction slowed him down enough for his rudders and flaps to bite into the atmosphere to bring him back home.
Yeah, you screwed up.
Yeah, that was the X-15 project, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was actually an X-15 flight.
Yeah.
There was a lot of those X-planes.
Yeah.
The famous, glamorous Glennis Bell X-1 was flown by Chuck Yeager.
Chuck Yeager, yeah.
That was the very first aircraft to break the speed of sound.
Yeah, but I couldn't imagine being in Neil's shoes at that moment because, at that time in our history, we're still learning about where the outer edges of the atmosphere was, and about how to survive in space. And here he is with no control of an aircraft and thinking, I got to slow it down sometime. It's like, man, how he maintained his calm and composure and said, okay, just doing my thing is just, that's mind-boggling, but that has to do a lot with, training and education. Those things the conspiracy theorists try to say is indoctrination. A less educated or trained man would have freaked out hard.
Oh yeah, but if you've been trained to do these things, I mean, guys like that are going to immediately assess the situation they're in, figure out what they have available to them, what they can do and what they can't, what things are still operating, and work on that. You don't worry about the stuff that won't work anymore. There's no point.
Yeah, and if anybody out there still doesn't believe that our atmosphere is a gradient, then get yourself into a 747, take it up to 38,000 feet, and open the door and see what happens. Good luck with that.
And I think Amy has some more comments from the live chat for us. Amy?
I do. I have some interesting ones too. Let's see here. Mike Bertelson says it was related to relative density, then the acceleration would be different. for different materials. I could not figure out a way to make this Shakespearean, because and then BMS's gas pressure videos have caused the globe deniers to move the goalposts more than just about anything else. And John Rapp says, Big Blue, could you confirm that the original 1972 blue marble photo had the Earth's orientation correct? Australia and Antarctica are on top of the world.
No, they had the camera upside down.
No.
We are on the top. Australia is on the bottom. I don't care what anybody says. That's the way it works. What I want those Australian guys to do is stop playing with the moon. I talked to a bunch of them on Discord off and on. Their moon is always upside down compared to my moon. I don't know what they're doing to it. I want them to quit. That damn thing's got 6 American flags planted in it. Not one Australian flag. They need to quit playing with it. It's not their moon. It's our moon.
Leave our moon alone.
Yeah, that's what I love about this show is we can have real serious discussions and still interject a little bit of humor, but really though, seriously, and when it comes to being in space and looking back at the Earth and taking a picture, there is no up and down because you're not in a gravitational field to designate up and down. So again, it's relative.
Yeah, everything is up, everything's down. I mean,
that's right.
No matter where you are, we know. No matter where you go on this planet, you know which way down is, and you know which way up is.
Yep.
Always
down is where your feet are.
Yep.
Yeah, and the conspiracy claim that up is up and down is down and gravity isn't a thing. That's just ridiculous. Well, that's toddler thinking.
Yeah, exactly. If that were true, then myself living in Vietnam, I'd have to be tied off to the wall of my apartment so I don't slide out the window.
Oh, well.
Just silliness.
It is. It's absolute silliness. It's just very simplistic, as Logical said, toddler-like, two-dimensional thinking.
Yeah, it's a shame. Makes you question the educational system. What may have gone wrong here?
Yeah, and of course, when you're flying an aircraft, you can't afford to be thinking in two-dimensional space. You must think in three-dimensional space, or things are going to go seriously wrong really quick.
Yeah. But with regard to our topic for tonight, which is flight myths, I reiterate Blue's suggestion that get yourself to a local private airport and take an introductory flight with one of the local flight schools. All of your questions will be answered, I promise.
I wonder how many conspiracy theorists will actually do that. They're constantly telling us, do your research, but how many of them actually do that?
Well, isn't that really the problem, Logical?
That's a huge chunk of the problem, yeah. If you actually are not going to do the research, do the experimentation, and experience those things, and you're just thinking in terms of thought and what you think logic is, things can go wrong in a hurry. Things work in conjunction with each other, just like in an aircraft. There's pitch, roll, and yaw. There's thrust versus drag versus gravity. Logic and reason and mental models work in conjunction with each other the same way all those forces work in conjunction in an aircraft. Nothing works in isolation. There's never a time when only one force is operating at a given time, unless it happens to be a conspiracist's mouth.
Yeah. It's all about doing the research you need to do to be able to understand what it is you're trying to understand. I mean, even for you, Blue, being an engineer, did you ever once have to design something off the cuff, or did you do research before you hit the drawing board?
Man, we generally like to know what we're trying to accomplish and understand the problem before we go doing things. Well, yeah, maybe an artist will start with a big blob of modeling clay and decide later what he's going to really make out of it. But that's not how engineering works. No, not at all.
There's a lot of research and a lot of planning.
I just saw in the live chat that Andrew Stoll was talking about the so-called pilot that Mark Sargent had interviewed. I watched a bit of that, not a whole heck of a lot of it, and he suggested that maybe we could track him down and get him on the show with Blue and Bob and talk about this topic again sometime in the future. If we can track him down, that'd be a way cool thing to do.
I think it would be very interesting.
Yeah, I'd love to meet a pilot that thinks it doesn't work the way we've just been talking about.
Yeah, I'd like to know what airline he flies for so I can stay away from it.
Yeah. Okay, well, it's a date then. Amy and Jeff and I will do our best to track that individual down and invite him on the show. And if he agrees, yeah, we'll definitely revisit this topic.
Heck yeah. Yeah, that'd be great. I don't have anybody to argue with right now, so.
Yeah, not that this show is meant to be a debate channel, but I'm not adverse to it when it's relevant to what we've been discussing.
I seriously would love to meet a pilot, a legitimate pilot, licensed pilot, that literally thinks the Earth is flat, that these things don't work the way I understand them. I'd like to know why someone would think that way.
So would I, because honestly, I don't believe there's such a pilot out there. I really don't. I think it's just all a story, a fantasy.
Yeah, and just the fact that aviation navigation requires non-Euclidean geometry makes it a completely moot point.
You know, I just don't believe an airline would hire a pilot that thought that way.
No. I don't think they'd keep him around if they found out he thought that way.
Exactly. Because that would be a dangerous pilot.
Yeah, and we're an hour and a half into the stream. We usually allow up to 2 hours for these streams because we don't want to abuse anybody's time who agrees to come on the show, as much as I would love to keep picking their brains. But it does sound like we've kind of come to the point where we have beat this conspiracy idea to death. So, Amy, is there anything going on in the live chat that might continue our conversation?
Yes. Mike Bertelson says, I've discussed testing with flurfs at length, and most tell me that they don't need to do them. Their senses tell them everything they need to know. And I think that's something that's might be a conversation sparker too. And Witsa says, denial of all the senses accuracy requires introspective corrections. Yeah, interesting things.
Yeah,
I love it when they say trust your senses. But yeah, I've been to see Chris Angel. I've been to see David Copperfield, and trust me, when it comes to those guys, I am not trusting my senses. They can be fooled, and they are fooled regularly. Crepuscular rays is an optical illusion that fools my eyes. So yeah, come on, Witsa. Come to a show with a professional magician, and I'll explain to you why that coin didn't really disappear into thin air.
Yeah, I was about to say, you ever watch Penn and Teller? Come on.
Yeah, those guys are great.
Exactly.
Do not trust your senses all the time.
That's the
All the
worst
time
thing
it's
you can
fine,
do.
but yeah.
Your senses are the easiest thing to fool.
Yep. Well, for the most part, we see what we expect to see.
Yeah, and that's what scientific experimentation is all about. Removing those layers of our senses being fooled to get at the nitty-gritty of what's really going on.
Yeah.
Well, that's what it's all about. I mean, the entire idea behind the scientific method really only has a very narrow objective, and that is to prevent you from thinking something is true that isn't true, or conversely, thinking something isn't true that actually is true. As long as you take the necessary steps to ensure that you're not being fooled, you're meeting the scientific method. But that's a topic for another day.
Yeah,
Yep, that'll definitely be the topic on the very next show.
absolutely. We're going to have AB Science on with you, and I think we're going to learn a lot.
Oh, I know I will. AB Science is the man.
Well, he is. He is. But I'll be honest, even on tonight's show, I've learned a lot about aviation that I had some misconceptions about, thanks to you. And I have a clearer picture now, but I never ever thought that an airplane had to constantly point its nose down to stay level. I mean, just that makes no sense to me at all. Point the nose down, it tells me I'm going into the ground. I don't want to be doing that.
That's right. And please don't take your level on the airplane thinking you're going to see anything.
Yeah, that's pointless.
The forces in the plane are straight down into the seat. Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know how many times I've got to tell this to guys. Now, tell me you've never been on an airplane and sat there with your drink in front of you, which is perfectly level in the cup, and not paying any attention, and then looked out the window to realize only then that you're looking up at clouds and stuff. The plane is in a 20-degree bank, and you never felt it.
Mm-hmm.
You won't
Not
feel
a
it.
bit.
You will
No,
not
you won't.
feel it.
I've
You can
traveled
walk.
enough.
Yeah, you can walk down the aisle, right? We've all done that. Gotten up to go back to the bathroom, walking down the aisle, and then notice that you look out one window and it's all green, and you look out the other window and it's all blue. What's going on? Oh my goodness, the plane is in a bank, and I can't feel it.
Not at all. And if you were flying around the world on a flat Earth, then you'd be in a constant bank
Yep.
that never lets up. And you would
Oh.
feel that, I think, eventually.
Oh, yeah, good point. You just reminded me. Yeah, the conspiracy theorists like to claim that circumnavigation of the globe, whether it be on a ship or a plane, is just going around the North Pole in this big circle. But say you were traveling west, yeah, you'd have to be constantly steering right all the goddamn time in order to keep going around the North Pole in a circle. It doesn't work that way.
I've never observed it.
Neither have I. And the guys that just completed the pole-to-pole circumnavigation, what was that called? One last orbit?
Yeah.
Yeah. They went from South Pole to North Pole, completely around the globe. How's that possible on a flat Earth?
Well, it ain't,
Exactly.
You know, I would think that on that particular flight, had they observed the ice wall, they would have snapped a picture of it and say, "What the hell?"
You'd think so. You'd think so. That would be news.
Should have at least seen some armed penguins or something.
Yeah, no kidding. And that's another good point you make. The ice wall. I mean, every piece of footage I've ever seen from the coast of Antarctica, no matter which direction you're going, the coast is always turning away from you. If it was a wall, it would be turning in front of you constantly.
Yeah, it bends the wrong direction, doesn't it?
Exactly.
Seem to have a problem here.
I think so. It's called flat Earth.
Oh, well, what do you guys think? Should we continue just kind of chewing the fat about some of this stuff, or should we actually go get some breakfast or lunch
I
if you're in Europe?
I think we beat this unicorn to death.
What do you
Yeah.
think, Blue?
Yeah, I think it's time to give the poor unicorn a break.
All right. Well, let's check in with Amy one last time before we wrap up with some final thoughts. Amy, what do you got?
Yeah, a Floyd reference from Witsa, and then Mike Bertelson said level and flat are two measurements. There are actually different specifications for the tools measure each, and they have nothing to do with each other. And he's right.
What was that Pink Floyd reference? I was really a Pink Floyd fan back in the day, so I hope he's not going to try to ruin that for me.
I know, comfortably numb, he said. So I said, good song.
Yeah, okay. At least he's got some decent taste in music. I'll give him that. And,
Exactly.
There you go.
Well, thanks so much, guys, for inviting me today.
Always appreciate your input, Blue. And
Absolute
so,
pleasure.
do you have any final thoughts on this morning's conversation, Blue?
I think we've probably said enough at this point. Take the suggestions that we're giving you guys. If you've got questions about it, go take a flight in a small plane where you can actually fly the airplane. That will, I mean, a picture's worth 1,000 words, right?
Exactly.
You can answer so many of your questions just by doing that, and all it takes is just a little bit of your time. So if you're truly interested in finding out what the truth is, go do it.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. What about you, Jeff? Final thoughts?
Well, about the same as what Blue said, just go try it for yourself. I mean, it's not hard to understand what's happening when you're actually there doing it. And you will get the opportunity to control that aircraft and see what's happening when you move that yoke. There's no better way to get the answers to the questions you've got and to put away the silly notions that so many of you have. The flat earthers, that is, or conspiracy theorists, I should say. It's just the best way. Experience is the best thing you could do. Get some experience.
Yeah, absolutely. What about you, Teddy? Final thoughts?
Oh, this has been bloody brilliant, man. I have to say, I've enjoyed playing with Witsa or whatever in the chat. It's been good fun. Other than Google Earth not bloody working, and as you'll see, I'll just refresh again just for the sheer hell of it. There is bugger all progress with loading it up. So thank you, Google. I think there must have been fear that we were going to prove the Earth was not spherical or something, because they bloody pulled the plug on us. Maybe that's is right. But no. Once again, I have to say, another ridiculous theory that they come up with, man. And Christ knows where they come up with. But another ridiculous theory, quite nicely put to bed. Thank you very much for everyone and their input. Thanks to the chat. And Blue, thanks for coming on, man. Great to have you.
Oh, you bet. Pleasure to be here, Teddy.
What about you, Amy? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I have to just agree with everyone. Experience is best. That's how you learn things. Just go and experience it. Go to your local flight school and ask questions. It's okay to do that. The worst you're going to get, an answer. So just keep asking questions and just keep learning. That's the only thing I can say, pretty much. So, and I also want to say thank you to Blue for coming on. Thank you so much. This has been a really interesting and enlightening show. Thank you.
You bet. You bet.
And, well, I want to apologize to the live chat that Google Earth was being a bugger and not cooperating with us for this conversation. But any conspiracy theorists, like that's in the live chat, or any of them that may be watching this in replay, go ahead, pull up Google Earth on your own computer, take some measurements on the Great Circle route when it comes to aviation navigation, and see if it doesn't match what we are seeing in reality versus what it would be on the flat Earth. Go ahead, do a little bit of your homework. I challenge you. And I again want to thank Blue Marble Science for spending his time with us this morning, and always appreciate him being on the show. And with that, the only thing else I can say is read a book. It's a wonderful inoculation against stupidity. And with that, I'll ask
Absolutely.
Teddy to go ahead and take us home. I need some breakfast.